Breaking news. Nothing happened to the base rate in March.
Well, that's true, but I think that's probably underestimating everything else that's gone on in the last 2 months.
Oh, so on reflection, should we rethink that headline a bit then?
Well, I think the headline, probably in the scheme of things, is actually probably quite sexy given everything else that's gone on.
Well, I'm happy with that. Let's roll with it. So, welcome to The Rate Stuff. I'm Jack Izzard.
I'm Peter Stimson.
This is your essential guide to all things mortgage. Now, stay with us as we unpack what the Bank of England's decision on base rate means for you and for the mortgage market, and as we look ahead to what might be coming up. We've had 2 months of Trump 2.0. If you thought it's been a bumpy ride thus far, buckle up. Steady as she goes. That was the message from the Bank of England at its March meeting. The Monetary Policy Committee voted 8-1 to hold the base rate stable at 4.5%. No great surprise there. 99% of the market was predicting that. But there is a debate going on in the corridors of power at the Bank of England. And Peter, this is where it gets quite nuanced. We've got growth slowing, we've got inflation rising. It wasn't quite as straightforward as that decision might seem.
Yes, I mean, if you actually start reading the minutes, they're aware that obviously growth is, potentially slowing down. What they haven't seen is it coming through to the actual numbers yet. Lots of employers are reporting that hiring is slowing, that, output is kind of potentially going down. What they're waiting for is this to start appearing in the actual data. So, they are aware that, the numbers potentially going forward are not going to look so good. If you look ahead to inflation is expected to slow quite substantially in the summer months. So, if you project ahead and you look at where the swap market is pricing things, there's 2 rate cuts priced in into the curve. Hence why, the 2-year swap is around 4.06 at the moment and the 5 years around 4%. So, a couple of rate cuts are priced in and the Bank of England are kind of aware that, these factors are kind of pricing in ahead.
On the inflation side, yes, of course, we've got 3% CPI in January. There is the potential for another jump in April because we've got a couple of things happening then.
Yep.
We've got an increase in the national minimum wage. The employers' national insurance contributions are going to rise, so that's going to push up the cost of hiring people.
Yep.
Companies are probably going to pass that on in the form of higher prices. So we are not out of the woods on inflation yet by any means.
No, we're not. So, I mean, I think short term for the next 2 or 3 months, we could well see that, CPI stays stubbornly high, maybe even goes up slightly. So that's all kind of anticipated. It's in sort of the middle towards late summer that we're expecting, inflation to perhaps start falling. We've obviously got something, coming down the tracks, which is always a big unknown, which is obviously the potential risk of tariffs and other things. So, yes. So at the moment, short-term inflation is expected to stay, perhaps stubbornly high. It's, sort of middle of summer onwards, inflation is expected to fall.
So you've got to think the Bank of England, given all those concerns about growth, is going to be minded to keep cutting the base rate this year.
Yes, I think that's one of their concerns. I mean, they're mandated obviously to control inflation. They've got to get inflation below their 2% target. Growth is clearly a worry, given that obviously it was a negative last month. Markets are pricing in 2 rate cuts this year, given that the 2-year swap is now around 4.06, 5 years around 4%. Personally, if you're asking me at this moment, I think we may get a 3rd cut this year towards the end of the year. And if growth continues to be anemic and they can get inflation back under control, which I think is probably a possibility towards the end of the year when the inflationary pressures are pushed through, I think we may be looking at maybe another 1, possibly 2 cuts into 2026.
Peter, you are talking my language. So let's just unpick this. So you're talking about 3 more base rate cuts this year.
Yep.
And if they stick with past form of cutting by 25 basis points each time, that would mean, if my math serves, a base rate of below 4% by Christmas.
Potentially, yes.
And then another cut in spring next year?
Yes, but you've got to bear in mind, there are so many uncertainties out there, one of whom we'll be talking about very shortly.
Yes, uncertainties don't come bigger than the president of the free world. Stay with us as we dive into the hot topic. What will Trump 2.0 mean for mortgages here? Well, we all knew it was going to be a wild ride, but 2 months into the second Donald Trump presidency, it has been bonkers. Peter, where do you begin?
It's very difficult. I don't think anyone, even in their wildest dreams, predicted it could be quite like this.
Yeah, we've had, well, let's just name a few, really. He wants to absorb Canada into the US, fancies taking over Greenland, opening Riviera Spa in Gaza, tariffs on China, tariffs on his allies. All of this is very unsettling for the mortgage markets, isn't it?
It's unsettling for the mortgage market. It's unsettling for the global economy. Yes, you name it, it's caused ructions just about everywhere.
Now, we're not going to delve too much into the politics today, but let's keep our focus on what really matters, the mortgage market. The funny thing is even though it's been particularly nuts with tariffs, they're on, they're off, sometimes even an hour between decisions, if you look at the swaps rates, they've not been too nuts, have they?
No, we're going to post a little graphic up showing you the swap rate since the beginning of January. You'll notice a big fall around about the 19th. That's when CPI came in much lower than expected. But if you look more recently, there's a little bit of disturbance. That's when tariffs came in on Canada originally. Then there's another little disturbance. That's when tariffs came in on and off, and then think back on again. But swaps generally have actually stayed fairly low, where you perhaps expect the opposite, where tariffs are obviously seen as inflationary, which would naturally push swaps up. General reason why they haven't done is because of recessionary fears in America, which obviously would tend to keep interest rates low and by default gilts and swaps low. So it's held things for the moment. Where it goes longer term, we'll have to wait and see, because obviously the effect of tariffs and the effect of his policies haven't really yet to come into full force. So
we've got one angle there that could really impact us here in the UK, and that's Ukraine. Essentially, the president is saying that he's out, doesn't want to support the Ukraine war anymore, and that is going to mean that Europe, and the UK in particular, ends up with a whacking great bill. And we do expect to see considerable extra expense on defence here in the UK. What's that going to do in terms of government borrowing, in terms of the costs that we face here in Britain?
That's going to be challenging. So, short term, obviously, there's been a kind of a raid on the foreign, raid's probably the wrong word, but there's been a taking from one budget to push across the defence budget to 2.5%. Whether that's enough longer term remains to be seen. If you go back to the sort of 80s and 90s, we were spending 4% on defence during the Cold War. If you sort of assume that America kind of steps right back, whether we have to get defence up to that kind of level, we have to spend 4%. We're either going to have to raise the money through additional taxation, additional government borrowing, or it's going to have to come from other departments. So there's going to have to be some sort of tough decisions made around where the additional funding for defence is going to come from.
Well, a lot of those decisions will fall on the desk of the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. We've got the spring statement coming at the end of March. She's got a lot on her plate. The government's talking about having a £22 billion black hole in its finances. And there's that painful choice of, do you put up taxes? Do you cut spending? Do you borrow? Now, at the moment, the government is saying that it wants to cut spending more than increase taxes, but there is the possibility of increased borrowing as well. And how would that work? How does the government borrow money? It's not like you or I borrowing, is it?
No, basically they'd issue what they'd call government gilts, which is basically government loan stock out to the markets. To be honest with you, I wouldn't want to be Rachel Reeves at the moment, given everything she's got on her plate. So, of the three options, I think the one that's probably most palatable is to cut government expenditure. She could issue more government borrowing. That's probably not going to go down particularly well with the markets, given that what went on last sort of October time. So, of the three options, which is taxation, increase government borrowing, or cut government expenditure, the latter is probably the most likely, I would think, given everything that's going on.
So an austerity spring statement from a Labour Chancellor.
It looks most likely, but we'll have to wait and see next week.
When governments get a bit strapped for cash, they have one luxury that the rest of us don't. They can just increase tax on their population. But they can also borrow. Now, they borrow in a different way. They borrow through gilts rather than mortgages. But Peter, the gilts market, it impacts mortgages as well, doesn't it?
Yes, so fixed rate mortgages are backed out through gilts. So if the price of gilts rises, fixed rate mortgages rise. So Rachel Reeves obviously has the option to raise more money through issuing government gilts. The problem with that is obviously the gilt rate market has a sort of supply and demand balance. You push more gilts into the market, supply and demand balance changes, and obviously the price for the gilts will change on that basis, and obviously the price of gilts will go up. There's also a confidence factor in the market, whereas if the market thinks that the government is issuing too much debt and they don't think the government's quite got its finances in order, again, the price for the government gilts will change, and hence the price of fixed rate mortgages potentially will go up as well. So Rachel Reeves obviously has a balancing act between getting her taxation policies right and the amount of money she raises through tax, and also the amount of money she raises through issuing government debts.
So, Chancellor, if you're watching, no pressure. The spring statement is due on Wednesday, the 26th of March, and we will be back with a full analysis of what it means for you and for the mortgage market. In the meantime, do ask us a question on LinkedIn and do follow us on YouTube. But for now, thanks for watching, and join me and Peter for the next episode of The Rate Stuff.